As we begin to review over the muscular system, we need to be aware that there are three types of muscles. There is cardiac muscle, skeletal muscle, and smooth muscle. Each of these three types of muscles have distinct characteristics that will help aid us in identifying whether a tissue sample is skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle, or smooth muscle. So we will review over these characteristics on our upcoming slides. Here we see a cross-section of skeletal muscle. Now as we look at this particular slide, one of the things we want to be aware of is that skeletal muscle is multinucleated. And we can look at these right here, and we can see the nucleus right here, and we can see the nucleus right there. All of those little dark dots are the nucleus. And so here we have a muscle fiber or a muscle cell, and we will see more than one nucleus per cell. In other words, multinucleated. And that is one of the key characteristics we want to use to identify skeletal muscle in a cross section. Here we have a longitudinal section of skeletal muscle. And again, we see the same thing. We see that it's multinucleated. We can also see the striations of skeletal muscle. When one thinks of the muscular system, it is skeletal muscle that they think of. Now, the characteristics of skeletal muscle is that it's multinucleated, it is striated, or we see the stripes, and it is voluntary. So here we have our striations labeled, and when we look at the striations, that is going to be due to the presence of the protein actin and myosin, and the muscle units themselves, the sarcomeres, shortening or elongating. So again, we see a multinucleated skeletal muscle where the bands have been labeled, and we'll have our I bands and our A bands showing our sarcomere units shortening. But do recognize that this is skeletal muscle and go with those multinucleated structures. Now, skeletal muscle is much different from smooth muscle. Smooth muscle is uninucleated. It has one centrally located nucleus. It is not striated, and it is not under voluntary control. The two cuts that we will see with smooth muscle will be a cross-section and a longitudinal section. Now that particular cut that we're looking at here will show up later when we observe the digestive system. So we're going to start off right here with our cross section of our smooth muscle. And what I want you to think of here is we can see all the little nucleus located, but they've taken the cell and they have cut it. And they've cut it so if you can see these as being like the ends of a pencil. And so they're just stacked among one another. Where here the smooth muscles are running longitudinal, and I want you to think of it as being like the grooves of a CD or a record. So we have our smooth muscle with our cross section and our longitudinal section. Here we have our cardiac muscle. Now let's just outline it and notice right here that we can see that our cardiac muscle is branched. And that's one of the big characteristics that we see with cardiac muscle is that branching. We have a centrally located nucleus, and this branching allows for our muscles to weave and tie together. And the place where the muscles tie together is called the intercalated disc. And we need these muscles to tie together in order for electrical impulses to pass through the heart. So we find the cardiac muscle within the heart. The skeletal muscle we find makes up the muscles of our body. And the smooth muscle lines those hollow organs, or when we our stomachs are growling and we're feeling that rumbling in our stomach. It's that smooth muscle that we hear. Again, we're seeing just a different view of the cardiac muscle, and we can see that branching going on in that centrally located nucleus. Um, Cardiac muscle is striated, it is involuntary, and it is uninucleated. It has one nucleus per cell. So do review over the differences between cardiac and skeletal. On each of these you will see a striation, but notice all of the nuclei pushed to the side. And that's one of the things that I do need to mention to you, is that in addition to being multinucleated, the nucleus is pushed to the side of the cells. So we say it is peripherally located multinucleated. And it just means that we have more than one nucleus per cell and they're pushed to the edge of the cell. That is different from our cardiac, where we have the branching and we have that centrally located nucleus. Now remember that skeletal is under voluntary control, cardiac is involuntary. Both have striations. Skeletal makes up the muscles of our cells, of our body, and cardiac makes up the muscles of the heart. Again, one more view of a longitudinal section of our smooth muscle, and notice that we have that centrally located nucleus. These are somewhat teardrop shaped. Remember, our smooth muscle line the hollow organs of our bodies, so that rumbling in our stomach. They are involuntary, and we'll study these in a little more detail later on. One last view of our branching of our cardiac, our nucleus, and then our intercalated disc, very clear on this slide, along with our striations.